The year was 1914, a year that would mark the beginning of one of the most devastating conflicts in human history. The world watched in disbelief as Europe, a continent brimming with culture and progress, plunged into a conflict of unprecedented scale. Cities that once echoed with the sounds of daily life and cultural festivities were soon overshadowed by the ominous drumbeats of war. This was the Great War, later known as World War I, a conflict that would engulf the globe for over 4 long years. It was a war that would see millions of lives lost, families torn apart and entire nations brought to their knees. From the rolling hills of France to the desolate landscapes of the Middle East, millions of soldiers would clash in a brutal struggle for dominance. The war was fought on multiple fronts, each with its own unique challenges and horrors. On one side stood the Central Powers, led by Germany and Austria-Hungary. These nations, driven by ambitions of expansion and dominance, formed a formidable alliance. On the other side were the Allied powers, spearheaded by France, Britain and Russia. This coalition of nations, united by a common cause, sought to resist the aggressive advances of the Central Powers. What began as a regional dispute in the Balkans quickly escalated into a global conflict, drawing in nations from every corner of the world. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary set off a chain reaction of alliances and enmities, leading to a full-scale war. The world had never seen a war like this. Trench warfare, chemical weapons, and new forms of artillery brought unprecedented levels of destruction and suffering. It was a clash of empires, a collision of ideologies, and a testament to the destructive power of modern weaponry. The war saw the use of machine guns, tanks, and aircraft, changing the nature of combat forever. The Great War would forever alter the course of human history, leaving behind a legacy of profound loss, political upheaval, and lasting social change. The war's end saw the redrawing of national boundaries and the fall of empires, setting the stage for future conflicts. This is the story of that war. A war that reshaped the world and left an indelible mark on the collective memory of humanity. It is a story of courage and sacrifice, of brutality and loss, of technological innovation and human resilience. The soldiers who fought in the trenches, the medics who tended to the wounded, and the families who waited anxiously at home all played a part in this epic saga. It is a story that must be told, lest we forget the lessons learned and the sacrifices made in the name of peace. The Great War serves as a stark reminder of the cost of conflict and the enduring hope for a better, more peaceful world. The seeds of the Great War were sown in the heart of the Balkans, a region long known as the powder keg of Europe. On a sunny June day in 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie arrived in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. Their visit was intended to be a show of strength and unity, but it would tragically ignite the flames of war.
With a pistol in hand, he fired 2 fatal shots, killing both the Archduke and his wife.
The assassination sent shockwaves through Europe, shattering the fragile peace that had held for decades. Austria-Hungary, outraged by the assassination on its heir apparent, blamed Serbia for harboring nationalist groups and issued an ultimatum demanding satisfaction. Serbia, backed by its powerful ally Russia, attempted to negotiate but ultimately failed to meet all of Austria-Hungary's demands. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the spark that ignited the powder keg, but it was merely the catalyst for a much larger conflict. The stage had been set by years of simmering tensions, fueled by nationalism, imperialism, and a complex web of alliances. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand exposed the deep-seated tensions and rivalries that had been brewing in Europe for decades. This single event acted as a catalyst, igniting a series of actions and reactions that would plunge the world into one of the deadliest conflicts in history. Nationalism, the fervent belief in the superiority of one's own nation, had taken root across the continent, fostering an atmosphere of distrust and competition among the great powers. This sense of national pride and identity often translated into a desire for greater power and influence, leading to aggressive foreign policies and a readiness to go to war to defend national honor. Imperialism, The drive to expand a nation's power and influence through colonization and conquest further exacerbated these tensions. European nations were not only competing for dominance within the continent, but also for control over vast territories in Africa, Asia and other parts of the world. This scramble for colonies created friction and conflict as nations vied for the same territories and resources. European powers vying for control of resources and territory clashed in far-flung corners of the globe, fueling an arms race and deepening existing rivalries. The competition extended beyond mere territorial disputes. It also involved a race to build the most powerful military forces. Nations invested heavily in their armies and navies, believing that military strength was essential for national security and prestige. To protect their interests and deter aggression, European nations formed a complex web of alliances, pledging to come to each other's aid in the event of attack. These alliances were meant to create a balance of power, ensuring that no single nation could dominate the others. However, they also meant that a conflict involving one nation could quickly draw in its allies, turning a local dispute into a full-scale war. These alliances, intended to maintain peace, ironically served to escalate the conflict when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. What might have remained a regional conflict quickly spiraled out of control as allied nations were drawn into the fray, each honoring their commitments to support their partners. Within weeks, the dominoes began to fall. The intricate system of alliances and mutual defense pacts meant that a declaration of war by one nation triggered a chain reactions, pulling multiple countries into the conflict. Russia, bound by treaty to protect Serbia, mobilized its army. This mobilization was seen as a direct threat by Austria-Hungary and its ally Germany, who were determined to support their own interests and maintain their influence in the region. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia and its ally, France. The German military strategy, known as the Schlieffen Plan, called for a quick strike against France through Belgium, aiming to avoid a prolonged two-front war. Great Britain, obligated to defend Belgium's neutrality, declared war on Germany after German troops invaded Belgium on their way to France. The invasion of Belgium was a crucial turning point, as it brought Britain into the conflict, further expanding the scope of the war. The Great War had begun. What started as a regional conflict in the Balkans had escalated into a global war involving nations from across Europe and beyond. The world would soon witness unprecedented levels of destruction and loss as the war dragged on for years, reshaping the political and social landscape of the 20th century. The Western Front, a 400-mile scar stretching across northeastern France and Belgium, became synonymous with the brutality and stalemate of World War I. This vast expanse of land, marked by endless lines of trenches, was the stage for some of the most grueling and relentless battles in history. The landscape, once serene and picturesque, was transformed into a desolate wasteland, echoing with the sounds of artillery fire and the cries of soldiers. Here, millions of soldiers faced each other in a nightmarish landscape of trenches, barbed wire and machine gun nests. The trenches, often filled with mud and water, became the soldiers' homes, their places of refuge and their graves. The constant threat of enemy fire and the omnipresent danger of gas attacks made every moment a test of survival. Trench warfare, a new and terrifying form of combat, emerged as the defining feature of the Western Front. This method of fighting involved digging extensive networks of trenches where soldiers would live, fight and die. The trenches were often only a few hundred yards apart, making any attempt to cross no man's land a deadly endeavour. Soldiers lived in cramped, muddy trenches, constantly exposed to enemy fire, disease and the psychological strain of prolonged combat. The conditions were harsh and unforgiving, with rats, lice and the ever-present mud adding to the soldiers' misery. The psychological toll of living under such conditions was immense, leading to what was then known as shell shock, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Attacks were often met with withering machine gun fire, resulting in staggering casualties for minimal territorial gains. The strategy of attrition, where each side aimed to wear down the other through continuous losses, led to a seemingly endless cycle of attack and counterattack, The human cost was enormous, with entire battalions decimated in a matter of minutes.
The Battle of the Somme, launched by the British and French in July 1916, epitomized the horrors of trench warfare. This battle, intended to break the stalemate and achieve a decisive victory, instead became a symbol of the futility and devastation of the war. The initial artillery bombardment, meant to destroy the German defenses, failed to achieve its objectives, leaving the attacking troops vulnerable. After months of preparation and a massive artillery bombardment, British troops went over the top, only to be cut down by German machine guns. The soldiers, burdened with heavy equipment, struggled to advance through the shell-torn landscape of no man's land. The barbed wire, intended to slow down the enemy, became a deadly obstacle for the attackers.
By the time the battle ended in November, over 1 million soldiers had been killed or wounded, making it one of the bloodiest battles in human history. The scale of the casualties was unprecedented, with entire communities back home mourning the loss of their sons, brothers and fathers. The battle left a lasting legacy, shaping the collective memory of the war and highlighting the immense human cost of the conflict. The Western Front became a grinding war of attrition, a brutal test of endurance that claimed the lives of millions and left countless others physically and emotionally scarred. The relentless nature of the fighting, combined with the harsh conditions, made survival a daily struggle. The soldiers' experiences on the front lines were marked by moments of intense fear, profound loss and fleeting camaraderie. Yet despite the horrors they faced, soldiers on both sides displayed remarkable courage, resilience and camaraderie in the face of unimaginable adversity. Acts of bravery and kindness were common as soldiers looked out for one another and found ways to maintain their humanity amidst the chaos. The bonds formed in the trenches were unbreakable, forged through shared hardship and the constant threat of death.
The First World War, a conflict of unprecedented brutality, had ended in 1918. However, its resolution did not bring lasting peace. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to end the war, instead sowed the seeds of future conflict. Germany, burdened with crippling reparations and territorial losses, felt humiliated and resentful. The global economy, ravaged by the war, struggled to recover. In the shadow of this instability, a new threat emerged: fascism. Fueled by economic hardship and nationalist fervor, fascist movements gained power in Italy, Germany, and Japan. These regimes, led by charismatic dictators, promised national rejuvenation and expansion. They rejected democracy, embraced militarism, and promoted aggressive nationalism. The failure of appeasement further emboldened the fascist powers. Hoping to avoid another war, Britain and France adopted a policy of appeasement towards Hitler's Germany. They made concessions, hoping to satisfy his territorial ambitions and prevent further aggression. However, appeasement only emboldened Hitler, demonstrating the weakness of the democracies. By the late 1930s, the world stood on the brink of another global conflict. The Treaty of Versailles, the rise of fascism, and the failure of appeasement had created a powder keg. The world waited anxiously, hoping against hope for peace, but bracing for the inevitable eruption of war. On September 1st, 1939, the world watched in horror as German forces stormed across the Polish border. World War II had begun. Hitler's blitzkrieg, a lightning war of rapid movement and overwhelming force, quickly overwhelmed the Polish defenses. Britain and France, honoring their treaty obligations to Poland, declared war on Germany.
The fall of Poland was swift and brutal. German forces, aided by the Soviet Union, crushed the Polish resistance. The invasion of Poland marked the beginning of a series of stunning Axis victories. Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg all fell to the German war machine. In a shocking turn of events, France, once considered Europe's mightiest military power, collapsed under the weight of the German offensive. Paris, the City of Lights, fell to the Nazis in June 1940. The speed and ferocity of the German blitzkrieg stunned the world. The fall of France left Britain alone to face the Nazi threat.
Our Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a staunch opponent of appeasement, rallied his nation for a long and difficult struggle. The Battle of Britain, a fierce air battle waged over the skies of England, would determine the fate of the island nation. Emboldened by his victories in Western Europe, Hitler turned his attention eastward. On June 22, 1941, he unleashed Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. The attack, launched in violation of a non-aggression pact, caught Stalin completely off guard. The initial stages of Operation Barbarossa were a stunning success for the Germans. They advanced rapidly, capturing vast swathes of Soviet territory and inflicting heavy casualties.
However, the Soviet people, inspired by their leader's call for a great patriotic war, fought back with fierce determination. The Battle of Moscow, fought in the brutal winter of 1941-42, marked a turning point in the war. The German advance stalled, and the myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered. The Red Army, bolstered by fresh Siberian divisions and aided by the harsh Russian winter, launched a counter-offensive, driving the exhausted Germans back from the outskirts of the capital.
In the Pacific, the tide also began to turn. The Battle of Midway, fought in June 1942, proved to be a decisive victory for the United States Navy.
American codebreakers had deciphered the Japanese naval code, giving them advance warning of the attack. The American victory at Midway crippled the Japanese Navy and marked the beginning of the long and arduous island-hopping campaign across the Pacific.
The Allied victory at El Alamein in North Africa, led by General Bernard Montgomery, marked the beginning of the end for the Axis powers in that theatre. The victory in North Africa paved the way for the Allied invasion of Sicily and Italy in 1943. On June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history took place. Operation Overlord, better known as D-Day, saw Allied forces land on the beaches of Normandy, France.
The invasion, meticulously planned and bravely executed, established a crucial foothold in Western Europe. From the beaches of Normandy, Allied forces, spearheaded by American, British, and Canadian troops, battled their way across France. The liberation of Paris in August 1944 was a momentous occasion, signaling the imminent defeat of Nazi Germany.
In the east, the Red Army continued its relentless advance. The Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, ended in a decisive Soviet victory. Soviet forces, hardened by years of brutal warfare, pushed westward, liberating Eastern Europe from Nazi occupation. As Allied forces closed in on Berlin from the east and west, the Nazi regime crumbled. Hitler, facing defeat, committed suicide in his underground bunker on April 30, 1945. A week later, Germany surrendered unconditionally, marking the end of the war in Europe. Section 5, the home front, sacrifice and transformation. While soldiers fought on distant battlefields, the war also raged on the home front. Civilians on all sides endured hardship rationing and the constant fear of air raids. The war effort demanded unprecedented sacrifices. Governments mobilized their economies for total war. Factories were retooled to produce weapons and ammunition.
Women entered the workforce in record numbers, taking on jobs previously held by men. The war also had a profound impact on society. Traditional gender roles were challenged as women took on new responsibilities. Racial and social barriers were broken down as people from all walks of life united in the common cause.
Section 6, the Holocaust, a stain on humanity. Amidst the chaos and destruction of World War II, the Nazi regime carried out a systematic and horrific genocide. The Holocaust, the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews, stands as one of the darkest chapters in human history. Driven by a twisted ideology of racial hatred, the Nazis targeted Jews, along with other groups deemed undesirable for extermination. Jews were rounded up and deported to concentration camps, where they were subjected to unimaginable horrors, forced labor, starvation, torture, and mass murder. The horrors of the Holocaust serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked hatred and prejudice. The world vowed never again, but the fight against intolerance and discrimination continues. Section 7, a new world order, the aftermath of war. The end of World War II marked the beginning of a new era. The old world order, shattered by conflict, gave way to a new bipolar world dominated by the United States and the Soviet Union. The war had left a legacy of devastation. Millions lay dead, cities lay in ruins, and economies were in shambles. The task of rebuilding a war-torn world seemed daunting.
From the ashes of war emerged a new hope for international cooperation. The United Nations, founded in 1945, aimed to prevent future conflicts and promote peace and security. The UN Charter, signed by 50 nations, enshrined the principles of international law and cooperation.
Section 8. The Cold War, a legacy of distrust. Despite the hopes for a lasting peace, a new conflict emerged from the ruins of World War II, the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies against fascism, became locked in a global struggle for power and influence. The Cold War was a clash of ideologies: capitalism versus communism, democracy versus totalitarianism. It was a conflict fought not on traditional battlefields, but through propaganda, espionage, and proxy wars. The Cold War cast a long shadow over the second half of the 20th century. It fueled an arms race, divided the world into two opposing camps, and led to numerous regional conflicts. Section 9. Decolonization, the fall of empires. World War II had a profound impact on the colonial empires of European powers. The war had weakened the colonial powers, both economically and politically. At the same time, it had fueled nationalist movements in the colonies. In the decades following the war, a wave of decolonization swept across Asia and Africa. European empires crumbled as former colonies gained their independence. India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Algeria, Ghana, and numerous other nations emerged as independent states.
The process of decolonization was often turbulent and violent. Wars of independence, civil conflicts, and political instability marked the transition from colonial rule to self-determination.
Section 10. Economic repercussions, recovery, and transformation. World War II had a devastating impact on the global economy. The war had disrupted trade, destroyed infrastructure, and depleted national treasuries. However, the post-war period also witnessed a remarkable period of economic recovery and growth. The United States, emerging from the war as a global superpower, played a key role in stimulating global economic growth.
The Marshall Plan, a massive aid program funded by the United States, helped to rebuild war-torn Europe. Japan, devastated by the war, also experienced an economic miracle, transforming itself into an industrial powerhouse.
Section 11. A World Forever Changed. Reflections on World War II. World War II was a watershed moment in human history. It was a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality, a conflict that touched the lives of millions around the globe. The war left an indelible mark on the world. It reshaped the geopolitical landscape, ushered in the atomic age, and led to the creation of new international institutions. The lessons of World War II remain relevant today: the importance of international cooperation, the dangers of unchecked hatred and prejudice, and the need to defend freedom and democracy are values that resonate in the 21st century. As we reflect on the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, we remember the sacrifices of those who fought and died. We honor their memory by striving to create a more peaceful and just world.